permission to record. The system does it automatically. All right, so let us know now if you have a problem with our recording this. We'd like to share it with others who can't be here with us. Welcome everyone, and it's nice to have you with us. I again am Andy Norman. I facilitate this group, which is sometimes we call Examined Lives. It's a forum for exploring fascinating ideas together in a highly collaborative way. I should mention that Sage and the good folks at ProSocial World are hoping that this community will grow onto an online platform called Hilo, where we can continue the discussions between sessions. Now, I'm not in a position to devote a lot of my time to maintaining those discussions on Hilo, but there's no reason why I should be a bottleneck. If some of you guys want to get together on Hilo and swap ideas, I think that would be wonderful. There is a group set up there, and you need to make some small but good faith donation to ProSocial Commons, I think, to gain access to it, but then you actually gain access to a bunch of good things, especially if you like to swap ideas with other people who are interested in evolutionary thinking and its application to today's world. So
let me amend that too. We're using our Examined Lives Hilo more openly. So you're welcome to use Examined Lives, that space as a digital representation. But it's a part of ProSocial Commons, which is, as Andy mentioned, basically with a small donation, then you're joining. There are 10 groups now. We're all working on different projects. So it's more of an active kind of community. But if you just want to do all things Examined Lives, then I'm going to put the link in the chat, and it's in the email as well. And you're more than welcome to carry on there.
Sage, what does that mean? If you go on Hilo, which I did register with, what is the, do you go on with my name, or I sign into Examined Lives? I mean, what does that look like? Or I'll find out.
So when I'll share this link, and it's the same one that is in the email. And yes, if you don't have a Hilo account, it'll prompt you to make one, at which point you'll just, via that link, be added to the Examined Lives group, and you'll see basically like a space just for us.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome, George. So our topic today is honor cultures. And as I think it was Hank who mentioned in the run up to the start of this session that we sometimes contrast honor cultures with dignity cultures. Sociologists and anthropologists use these terms to signal what they regard as a very important difference between types of cultures, although I would imagine that they would acknowledge that there is a continuum between these two types, but they seem to be importantly different types. I think I want to do what we did last time, which is break into small breakout groups to begin discussing the topic. We'll do that in a minute. Just to get us started, I'm going to offer a few examples of what I understand to be honor cultures. And one of the questions I'll ask is, what do these examples have in common? What other examples can you think of honor cultures? And I have a couple other questions to get our critical thinking juices flowing. But I believe that nomadic herdsmen, and I've heard that from the Scottish Highlands, among other places, often have more of an honor culture. And I have heard it said that the samurai of feudal Japan had a very strong element of honor culture. When I think about the gunslingers and the cowboys of the Wild West, I think that might qualify as significantly colored by the honor culture ideas. Thinking knights and ladies of medieval Europe sustained an honor culture of sorts. I'm going to stop there with I have a few more, but I'm going to stop there because I want to give you guys a chance to come up with examples in your breakout groups. So why don't we spend 10 minutes in groups of, let's say, 3, Sage. We're going to put 10 minutes on the clock. Here are the questions. If you could jot this down so you have a couple of questions to focus on. So can you think of other examples of honor cultures? What would you take to be the defining feature of honor cultures? What are they? I think it would be interesting to ask, why do they form? By the way, you don't have to answer all of these in 10 minutes, but these are some of the questions we'll be discussing. What qualities confer status in honor cultures? So rather than take on all, I have a few others, but rather than take them all on, why doesn't each group start off with a few examples, take a guess as to what you would call a defining feature, and then pick some other question about honor cultures that you want to explore, and just bring back a little something to share with the main group. All right? Sound good?
Andy,
Okay.
Andy,
Yeah.
you want each group to like pick a reporter to?
So yeah, if each group could have a spokesperson, we'll come back and sort of share a couple of highlights from your time, and we're going to ask. I'll ask spokespeople to provide succinct summaries of a couple of neat takeaways. All right. Great. Have some fun in the breakouts, and see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. And it looks like Joe Velikovsky has joined us. Welcome back, Joe. Nice to see you. And Alan, good to have you with us.
Where is she going?
All right. So George, Sage, either one of you guys feel comfortable sharing a couple of our thoughts with the larger group?
I nominate Sage.
I think you had all the interesting ideas, but I'll try to back me up if I can't get it right.
Okay.
So we had a couple of threads, but one was just thinking, I think, in terms of scale and sort of that an honor culture is based on reputation, and that perhaps that's very fundamental and perhaps, original form of justice. And there are severe consequences for, losing your reputation. And so it seems that there's some sort of match between that and a smaller environment. But when you get to large scale environments like a city where it's many anonymous interactions, you can't keep track of your reputation anymore. And so it's the amazing effort has been taken in only the last few hundred years, perhaps, where we agree upon a human dignity, a universal human dignity that is enforced by formal institutions. And it doesn't matter what your reputation is.
Nice.
I think that's about it. And actually, I just wanted to add one thought that makes me think of is that today we get really upset in dignity culture when it seems like human dignity is being cast into, as they say, the court of public opinion. So all of a sudden your reputation is starting to seep into your human dignity, and these things are now being, so I think that's
interesting.
I'll leave that there, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Sage. I need a volunteer spokesperson from another group to share a thought or two.
I'll go.
Go, Steve.
Okay, so we started out by listing some honor cultures that occurred to us. We came up with 7 pretty quickly. The mafia.
Yes.
One I'd never heard of, German dueling societies, which is very specific. Certain Native American tribes, those that had warrior cultures,
Mm-hmm.
the military, Old Testament cultures, male sports in general, and current American political parties, especially the Republican Party, but certain fringe elements of the Democratic Party.
Fascinating. Okay.
In terms of characteristics of honor cultures, we came up with a few. They tend to be male dominated. They tend to be concerned with status and hierarchy, which may be redundant with the first thing I just said. One distinction between dignity and honor cultures is that honor cultures tend to have an external locus of control in terms of self-image and self-esteem, whereas the opposite is the case for, what did I just say? Honor cultures
have an external?
Honor cultures have an external locus of control, and dignity cultures have an internal locus of control. We talked a bit, we mentioned that we thought honor cultures tended to be more cohesive, perhaps, than dignity cultures. And we talked about, at some length, about the difference between family honor and personal honor. And a question was posed about whether there are any personal honor cultures that does not also extend to kin, where in some way an offense against a member of your family is somehow treated differently than an offense to you personally. So I think that summarizes as briefly as I can what our conversation was about.
Beautiful. That's lovely. Thank you, Steve. Someone from one of the other groups? I think we must have had 4 groups total.
Well, I'll speak to, there were, 4 of us, but I'll just speak to, because each of us contributed differently, but I will speak to the one I'm most proud of.
Okay.
And that is, what is it? Anybody remember what I said? I have to look it up. What did I say? Just wait a minute.
Alan, you want to help him out there? Al, when you
Here it is.
Yeah.
There's an upcoming I guess some of us, I think we all agreed that we're in the throes of an undignified, dishonorable culture that is evolving or devolving. However, that was just one thing we discussed.
Undignified and dishonorable. Wow.
Yeah, and that I suggest that we do, not we, but that we do some research on it and, get those people who know their history well to help us track it from way back,
Nice. Okay.
rather than a dignified, dishonorable culture.
In terms of evolutionary theory, it seems to make sense that we're going to get hybrids.
Yeah. That does seem right to me. Rob, were you also in Hank's group?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Anyone else from Hank's group want to toss in a thought?
Well, I think it was Alan who came up with Switzerland as an example of a culture that was harmonious and made up of diverse groups.
Hmm.
And I was thinking of other places where different cultures live together. What just occurred to me was the convivencia in Spain, when the Muslims took over, and there were Christian, Jew, and Muslim cultures that got along pretty well for about 700 years. Not all the time, but most of the time.
That was under the Moors?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting period in history I got fascinated by. So it's possible, but do they have to remain small? Do they have to have an external enemy?
Yeah.
If you think about, alien invasion movies that we're getting a lot of these days, it's trying to unite Earth against a common enemy, usually very fangy and lots of drool.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's turn to group 3 or one of the other groups. Someone ready to share?
Cut off, Alan. Did you bring up
Right.
Switzerland?
Yeah, we did that.
Oh, we
was
did.
mentioned.
Okay, I missed it. Sorry.
Sorry, Kathleen, Diane, has your group had a chance to?
I was with Hank and company.
Okay, gotcha.
Diane, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Yes, I think you're muted, Diane.
Where is she?
Lower left-hand corner to unmute.
No, I found it. No, we were centrally muted, and I sort of assumed it was going to be centrally unmuted. No, we talked about characteristics and perhaps where these characteristics come from, and found some examples, particularly Middle Eastern, because there were 3 of us in the group who have connections to Middle East. And so one of the things that we noted is that the literature that stems from studies of American culture and American South may not cover all the territory, because there are big swaths of the world that seem to be dominated by honor cultures. And I talked a lot, so I'll tell you some of the things I said. And then Mark also had a number of contributions, and maybe he'll jump in. But one of the central causative factors, in my view, is that there is no dependable central authority where that's a source of justice. So that groups and families have to fend for themselves, and to have status, you have to know, and other people need to know, that you can defend and protect your own bailiwick, whatever it is, your family or your sheep or your cows, like the cowboys of the American West or whatever. And we also talked about how this might be a subdivision of collectivism, with face cultures contrasted with honor cultures, and both of them contrasted with individualism, which tends to be associated with the dignity ethic, if you want to call it that. Let me turn it over to most vocal was Mark. Mark, are you there? I can't see you on my
Oh, that's
screen.
good. Yeah, no, that covers, you know, a big swath of our conversation. I think Ahmed also, who lives in Saudi, mentioned that it doesn't seem to be a concept that gets explicitly discussed or raised. And so it felt kind of novel to him, even though that's his cultural context. And I think there are some it seems like a really strong idea for me conceptually, but I'm interested in how this gets measured. And that's where, to me, the value of because the type of work I do, that's the kind of where the value of a concept comes in is, you know, to what extent can I measure it? And I would be interested in, even though I'm not a historian, but I'd be very interested to see some interdisciplinary work on this. And particularly, I'd like to see, getting at that question of causation, what are the conditions that produce a culture like this, partly as a way of testing the idea itself? Then can we make that more empirical and get some historians doing a more empirical approach to see whether, given the very big differences it seems between many of these different cultures that are labeled monocultures, do they really have these underlying qualities? So we raised not just Middle Eastern cultures, but we talked about Slavic cultures being honor cultures, maybe not every one of them, but I mean, there's a very strong component of honor there. And then the American South, and then some others have been mentioned here already. I would add Pakistani culture also has a really powerful honor component to it. And these seem to me like, I'm not an expert historian in any of these, but they seem like very different places, but there may be these underlying conditions that Diane has hinted at, but I would like to see that really fleshed out with a historical project, ideally.
Fascinating. Thank you. I'm wondering if anyone here sort of knows that literature. I added a couple links to sources on honor cultures, scholarly articles on honor cultures, but I wasn't able to drill very far into any of them. Does anyone know this literature at all, or no, in particular know how
I do sort of
measure this?
Yeah, I could send to Hilo a short bibliography.
That would be lovely. Thank you, Diane. And maybe, yeah, Steve.
So the one historical book I know by a historian is a book called Albion Seed by David Hackett Fisher. And what he does is he looks at regional cultures in America and connects each to a specific place in the United Kingdom where those initial immigrants came from. And so he distinguishes between New England and the Middle Atlantic states, and there's a lot of explanation in the book about why in both Appalachia and in the South you ended up with honor cultures based on where in England those people tended to come from, that they tended to be in nomadic herdsmen regions, as mentioned earlier. And it's an older book, but it's well documented.
And I think, thank you, Steve. And I think one of the really interesting things about that hypothesis is that, generations after a people give up herding animals, they can still have an honor culture, that the honor culture can persist and take new forms, even if they've.
Can I comment on that, Andy?
Please do.
And it's just interesting because I've read that book, Albion Seeds, particularly the Scots-Irish settlers and their archetypical honor cultures. People speak about it. But one of the things, and it's just a personal observation, having grown up in Northern Ireland, and that was the source of the Scots-Irish, and that was a Protestant culture. But over the last 100 years, the two communities seem to have switched. So in the 50s, the Catholic community, the Irish community, would have had a much more honor culture. I would have felt that they managed things within their own community. And the Protestant community, which come from the Scots-Irish, would have been much more law-abiding. But over the last 20 years, since there's been different settlement and the rules have become more amenable to the other community, it seems that the Catholic community now have become much more of a dignity culture, and paramilitary groups and terrorist groups have arisen in the other side of the community. So my question is it something that can flip like that? Is there if you have a polity where there's not there's not agreement on a single set of mores and rules to live by, do you tend to have one group that's honor and the other one that's dignity? Or, is it fixed? Like you've got your culture, you're from a herder background, and that's the way it's going to be for the next 300 years.
Wonderful question. And one of the things Cormac mentioned in our breakout group was that the distinction between honor and dignity cultures seems to be connected with Hobbes's notion of a leviathan. So if you have a single centralized authority that can administer a reliable, dependable system of justice, then there's less need to strut around and commit violence to bolster your image and protect your interests.
Just in support of that, Andy, just an interesting story that I don't know if people are aware of, but if you look at the Hebrew scriptures, the biggest part of the 5 books, the biggest part by far, is the story of when each tribe gathers around in a particular kind of way, and the head of each tribe comes to honor whatever's given by this God at Sinai and all the rest. And it goes on and on about all the tribute and how they are going to subsume themselves. And it just repeats it for all 12 tribes. It's unbelievable. It's like 4 times as long as anything else in the scripture.
Fascinating.
So that's kind of an interesting kind of story, which makes me think that sometimes this would be related to scale.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I would talk about, again, is American history has got to be a great source of this, because those Scots-Irish with their honor culture came in through Philadelphia, where the talk about a dignity culture, and they met the Quakers. Okay. And the whole story of the Scots-Irish and the Quakers in the United States is absolutely fascinating. How did they work themselves out? What went on, and the rest of it. So I just leave that as
fascinating. I take it the Quakers were more closely connected with dignity culture, yeah?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm assuming that. I haven't really looked at it, but everything I know about them would suggest that.
I was raised briefly in the Quaker faith, and the thing about the Quaker teachings that appealed to my mother was the idea that there is that of God in everyone. I think that's a Quaker way of saying everybody has dignity. Everyone has basic inherent worth. So that connects with my experience, Alan.
And they really didn't get along. Let's just put that at the bottom line. And when they ran into each other, they just didn't.
Makes sense.
It was pretty bad. Yeah.
All right, Steve.
Just a brief comment about the Leviathan and the earlier comment about honor cultures happen when there's no dependable central authority. That's essentially one of the central theses of Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, how violence has declined. One of the arguments he makes in that book is that violence declined basically when central authorities were able to take over that function, and as nation states, gradually built up. So that fits with, and Pinker has evidence to support that.
Right.
I would add one thought to this Leviathan concept. It seems to me that having centralized authority is maybe a necessary condition for a dignity culture, but it's maybe not well, actually, I'm not even sure that's true, but it's certainly not sufficient in the sense that you could have an all-powerful monarch, a tyrant who doesn't treat anybody as having inherent dignity, right? So it's when you bring the notion of
Putin today, Andy.
There we go. Yeah, the mere fact that Putin is a central authority figure with and a Leviathan of sorts doesn't mean by any means that he has created a dignity culture.
And I would like to add to Steve's comment. I think that's a very strong hypothesis that Pinker has, but it's really interesting to understand whether or not at lower scales in that same society, honor cultures are necessary as part of the overall picture of what you get. I'm not sure that a centralized authority who doesn't preside over more local honor cultures and groups divided out in particular ways would actually be able to get that declining violent result.
So honor cultures might be an intermediate stage in cultural evolution. or something.
Or well, maybe not even intermediate. Maybe it's a matter of scale. Maybe the cultures don't scale up or down. Maybe they require different cultures. Maybe we require different cultures at different scales.
Interesting. Hank.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. A couple of things, but I just thought of this one thing in terms of, let's just think of it as evolutionary psychology and the small group, the small tribe. I'm not sure in our readings or what I've gathered over the years, they're pretty much an honor culture. And if that's so, that suggests that our psyche, are in the neurobiology terms and evolution, that we have an honor culture way back. And in the neurobiology thinking, those, not just the data, but the maps that get laid down early on, the evolutionary map, is always influencing the current map. It never goes away.
Mhm.
It's always there influencing. So we can hypothesize that there's always a little bit of honor culture in us, given the different circumstances.
Yeah.
So
No, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
think about how often the hero of a movie or a really good novel exemplifies honor to a high degree. I mean, you really want to root for the protagonist who is deeply honorable. I mean, I find myself much more drawn to a protagonist driven by a sense of honor than a protagonist driven by the maximum to maximize overall utility for the common good, right? That there's very little inspiring about it doesn't trigger my, I don't automatically admire somebody who wants to spread utilitarian ideas the way I deeply admire somebody who takes honor.
yeah.
I don't mean honor in the sense of willingness to inflict violence. I mean honor in the sense that we'll do the honorable thing, we'll do the right thing, we'll be trustworthy, we'll keep his promises.
I wanted to say one more thing. I know you didn't finish. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Hank. I'm just looking at the fact that Rob and Diane want to jump in. So I'll come back to you, all right?
Yeah.
Get a chance. Rob?
I think it was Diane who suggested hierarchy in the forest. Yeah, and I'm in the middle of it and reading it very carefully because his view of hunter-gatherer cultures kind of jibes with my own, which is that they were egalitarian. So they did not have, they were not honor culture based, but they inflicted group justice. And of course, that's hard to do in a big group, but maybe voting Trump out of office is a way of collective action on that theme. But I think it's very important to remember that that some cultures tend towards egalitarianism because it is utilitarian, and others, sort of drift into this honor culture. And I don't know that a central authority really helps with dignity.
Interesting. Diane, thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to this idea of the evolutionary background. To my mind, it would be, rather than saying that this is laid down and that's laid down and the other thing is on top of it, to say that our brains are basically designed in such a way as to produce adaptive responses to whichever situations we collectively find ourselves in. And so that would help to explain why there are these big cultural shifts. So for example, when the agricultural revolution gradually takes place, people start adapting themselves to settled life and private ownership of land and other things like that. Whereas if they don't get into that mode, but they get into herding mode, they have mobile property and they have to deal with the implications and ramifications of that. And then when, you know, cities arise, people have to be able to deal with the anonymity and et cetera, and dignity becomes more important. But of course, everybody doesn't adapt at the same rate. And also, obviously, what you have learned in one generation bleeds over into the next. You don't get a blank slate with each new baby. That kid gets raised in a certain way and is taught certain things. And that's collectively true also.
Yeah. I wonder if the elements of honor culture are almost invariably found in higher degrees in rural than in urban settings.
I don't think so.
No, maybe not.
Well, I mean, yes, because, but then urban gangs and so forth would fit it. It's because of the lack of dependable overarching authority.
Well put. Fair enough and good point. Back to you, Hank.
Yeah, I think I'll stay with, as a therapist, at least in the last 30 or 40 years, the psychoanalytic or the psychotherapy community has recognized, other than what Freud said, they were influenced by our environment. So coming from that background, there's been a whole, I'll give you an example. I work with a fellow who's, let's say, comes from that Skyrish background, and his father, let's just call it that he brought the honor culture with him to his grandfather, and his father brought the honor culture to New York. And this guy didn't have the honor culture temperament, where his father was bringing in, you know, sucker punch the guy messes with you, beat him up, you know, that kind of a thing. And this guy just didn't have the temperament to do that. And he grew up in a neighborhood which was an honor culture neighborhood in New York. And the guy, if you just think about it in the simplistic way, that there was this dissonance between two generations, well, more than that, about he just didn't fit into the honor culture mode. He liked to beat up people. He didn't like to run with gangs. He didn't like to, you know, be the authoritarian mean guy. And
not
the poor
everyone
guy,
can
even though he has
thrive.
a very nice, no, and he didn't thrive because of it. It had messed up his studies and all. He made it through it, but it still affects him. He still thinks there's something that he didn't do what his dad really highly valued. And the dad put him down for it, just to give you a one-to-one example.
Thank you, Hank. I'd like to hear very briefly from Cormac and Simon. We are coming up on the end of the hour and we have to pick a topic for next time. So I'll ask you guys to be brief, all right? Cormac?
Yeah, I'll be brief. So it's just two books, I think, that connect to this. So one is called Against the Grain by Scott, where he talks about the origins of slavery about 5,000 years ago and what that's like. And the other one is Fukuyama, which is the origins of political order. And one of the things I think that's interesting is the mapping between the idea of the drivers of religion and the distinction between the two cultures. And quite possibly an honor culture connects to an ancestor worship view of religion, whereas a dignity culture connects more to a slave religion like Christianity or Islam or one of the more modern religions. And that maybe the reason that the dignity culture is not as deep in us is because it's a more modern evolution. It's only happened in the last 5,000 years.
Yeah.
Whereas ancestor worship goes back 50,000 years. So we will devolve to it, I think, if in moments of tension, because it's more natural for us. But those two books are great books.
Wonderful, thank you. Terrific. Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. In fact, I think you could argue that, I'm just reading Fukuyama's book, you could argue that honor culture is a political culture. It's a way of making people work together. And actually, it tends to happen within kin cultures. And one argument might be that why it happens in countryside is that it allows land to be transferred down within families, which is not necessary within cities. And therefore that strong kin or honor culture preserves the value of certain clans or whatever, but it's a country phenomena, not a city phenomena.
Yeah, fascinating. That makes a lot of sense to me. Wow, what a amazingly complex and fascinating phenomenon this honor culture thing is. I get the sense that there's more to say on it, maybe just a little bit more. So if those of you who'd like to stick around a few minutes after and chat about it, that's great. Let me hit the pause button here so that we can pick a topic for next time. So vote for as many of you as you like of the following. I'm going to talk you briefly through all of them, and then we'll hold the vote. I've decided to give each of our 4 candidate topics for next month a how-to orientation. In other words, I'm going to try to inject a notion of sort of a practical orientation. Because one of the things I think it's important to do is not just develop our understanding of these phenomena, but also to try to think through how we might live differently based on the understanding we develop together. So you might want to put this on your calendars. We'll meet again on May 19th, 12 Eastern. 12 Eastern for the official start, but come 15 minutes early if you like for a little convivial chatting. All right, possible topics for next time. How to love your work. How to grow trust. Third, how to be less reactive. And 4, how to be more objective. So pick one or more of those that you'd like to vote for. We'll do approval voting. And Sage, please help me count the votes. A good way to register your vote is to raise your hand using the reactions, raise hand feature under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. So if you would enjoy discussing how to love your work, let's see, actually, Cormac, you have a hand up. I don't want you to neglect the road. Okay, Cormac, should I take it that that's a vestigial hand?
Yeah, take it that way. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah.
I'm finding it hard to control the things on my mobile device, so I'm
Yeah,
going to go on mute.
Fair enough. Okay, who would like to discuss how to love your work next time? Oh, apparently you already all love your work. Don't need any help with that one. That's great. Good news. Either that or you just don't want to love your work, one or the other. Okay, hands down. Topic number 2, how to grow trust. Okay, Alan with a distinctively distinctive way of voting, but which is great. We love it, Alan. That's good. Okay, thank you. Hands down. Third possibility, how to be less reactive. Oh, another popular one. Okay, thank you. And finally, how to be more objective. Oh, hands down, and then unless you want to be counted also for how to be more objective. All right. Oh, that one's got, okay, interesting. And Hank, the clapping hands, I guess we'll count that as a vote as well. All right, thank you guys, hands down. Sage, do you have a tally for us?
It's a dead tie between grow trust and less reactive.
Okay, hands down, everyone. You get, you have to vote between the two. We're gonna have a runoff. Ready? Cormac, I'm not gonna count your hand unless you verbally indicate one or the other. Okay. So I have to choose between growing trust and being less reactive. All those in favor of growing trust? Oh, and Cormac should be added to that. Oh, actually, his hand is already up on that one. So, all right. We're not going to give him 2 votes. Okay, thank you. Hands down. And all those in favor of how to be less reactive.
That's
looks-
grow trust.
Looks to me like growing trust is our topic for next time. I will try to remember to bring back how to be less reactive as a possibility for future sessions, because that looks like it's got a few takers too. All right, thank you all. That should be a good one next week. Notice that it's a topic formulated in a very simple, non-technical, it's a question we can frame without jargon or anything. And anybody who is has experience with trust or its lack is free to bring tales from your own experience. I think it should be interesting to compare notes on that.
Andy, don't you address some of that, one, the less reactive and how to be more rational in your book, right?
I do, which is,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, that's one reason I'd like to come back to it.
Ah.
I already have that. Andy, can I ask, are you possibly going to publish a list of everybody's email? Did we talk about this before? There are people here I would love to write to and see if I can engage in.
Yeah, so Sage might be able to help us with that. So a couple things on that front, Rob. One way is this is a good, if you can join our Examined Lives discussion group on Hilo.
I'm on Hilo. I'm in the ProSocial Commons, so.
Okay, so well, that's one way to strike up a conversation with a fellow ex-liver.
It's a bit of a time sink, so.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
The other, you can also use the chat function to send somebody your email address or ask for theirs.
Yeah, my experience with the chat is that people don't see it, so.
No.
Well, fair enough. Sage, do you think we can email out a list of email addresses to?
I presume that people would want to give permission, but.
Yeah, I would say we'd have to figure out a way of getting consent first, but if there is consent, then there's certainly no problem to do so. But one thing, Rob, if you're on the ProSocial Commons Hilo, that's a separate group. We have our own Examined Lives Hilo as well.
Yeah, I haven't.
And that's might be an easy way to exchange contact information there.
Well, say,
If I could jump in and suggest, Sage, you have everybody's address. How about writing to each of us and saying, do you give permission
Yeah, I'll
to
do
share
that.
with the others?
I'll do that. And
It would really be helpful to have a list.
sure, that'll be easy.
I would love that too.
All right,
Great
great.
idea.
Thank you, Sage, and thanks for the suggestion, Rob. I love it. Okay, any more thoughts on honor cultures? I think we had a barn burner going there for a while, and there's probably more to say on the subject. I know I've got 5 or 10 minutes left. Yeah, Ed. I think you need to unmute, Ed, but.
No, sorry, I was waving to say, sorry, I gotta go.
Oh, gotta go. All right.
Bye.
Okay, Mark. You're leaving too? All right. I'll just mention one thing about honor cultures that I came across. The topic description I sent out contained links to 4 articles about honor cultures. And the first of those links is a doctoral dissertation by a woman who conjectures, makes the following conjecture. To the extent that a person's worth is held to be something others can take away, those are the conditions under which honor cultures develop. But you could even, I think on her account, treat that as almost a defining trait of honor cultures. An honor culture is one where your worth as a human being can be bestowed by others through their recognition or taken away by others through disrespect or some other form of damaging your reputation.
Andy, that's what I meant when I said external versus internal locus of control.
I did see a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely that.
Although the idea of locus of control and locus of worth, you might want to frame it in terms of
Well,
where worth comes from.
locus of control about your worth.
Fair enough. That's
Yeah,
even better
yeah.
yet. Yeah. And so you might argue that if human beings evolved in small tribes initially, then honor cultures were probably essential to our ancestors' survival. So it's no surprise that where elements of honor culture enters our thinking and our behavior. It does seem to me that dignity culture is a more recent cultural innovation, and it depends not just on having a Leviathan or centralized authority, it depends also on being able to instill in the vast majority of the populace the idea that everybody else has intrinsic worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan?
Well, I mean, this fits in with my thinking that early education and models of behavior is a very important part of education. And perhaps we're slipping too much into understanding and passing exams rather than knowing how to behave in society.
I'm sorry, we're slipping a bit out of, I missed a key word there.
So I think we may be slipping a bit too much into the learning of facts and passing of examinations rather than examples of good behavior and why good behavior counts. I'm always struck, I can bring this up every time, or at least be inclined to. What stories do you tell your children? What do they learn to be as a good human being? Now, another comment I make would be that people are both. They live in different environments. In some, they will be working on a dignity, and on others on an honor basis. So it's a very complex thing bringing up a child.
Yes. And I think providing examples of and the stories we tell children and the examples we provide them are probably far more important for their characters than the facts we pack into their heads. I'm with you, Alan, 100%.
This is very important to me at the moment because for many, many years, you know, we have a government specified religious education course that is required to be given in all schools, and an act of worship of all things that's required to begin every day. And we find it impossible to break through this because it's so tied up with influence as well as desirability. So it's a really live thing. And I think at a higher level, the example that we're being shown in the Ukraine is one that shows that these issues, can you possibly imagine sending off troops to attack others like they are doing at the moment? Is that what a human being does? So education, coming back to it, and education in behavior as well as knowledge of facts, I think is crucial.
I love it. I'm thrilled that you keep making points of that nature, Alan, I think, and you articulate it so well. That's a wonderful
Thank you.
Observation, I think. This might be the last comment I can stick around to hear, but Hank?
Yeah, I was thinking in, I don't know, call it psychodynamic terms about the concept of development. And I know you talk about it in your book, in not this language, but about differentiation, becoming, there's a guy, D.W. Winnicott, British psychoanalyst, who talked about, well, I'm riffing on his term, but the capacity to be oneself in the presence of another would be this Brit's 1950s language. But the whole notion about in the psychodynamics group process notion, somebody wrote a book called Loving and Being. In other words, be part of something and be your own person. And you can think of it simply, it's so fucking hard because of everything we talk about, social pressure, you know, honor culture, there's always a little bit of social pressure anywhere, whatever we call it.
Yeah.
So to be able to be yourself and have that mental immunity, if you want to call it, is really one of the things you would, but it's addressed in other intellectual, academic, practical groups about how do you maintain differentiation where group forces are what's called undifferentiation pulling.
Yes.
And that's a guy named Murray Bowen, psychiatrist in the 50s here in California. So
Yeah. Thank you, Hank. Guys, it was a pleasure. Joe, nice to at least see your name, if not your face. I take it it's there and your thumb. Okay, thanks. Simon, Rob, Cormac, Sage, Steve, Hank, thank you all, guys. This was a pleasure.
thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
See you next month, I hope.
Okay.
Bye.